to session 3 of CHCSOH013. It's work with people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And it's actually quite important to remember when we're talking about homelessness, it's about including at risk of homelessness, because it's the steps there are very close to being homeless as well. So it's not far away from it. So, but there's two different types of categories happening there. All right, so I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country, and I've just lost it. You're kidding me. It's just, sorry. Actually lost it. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are learning today, and I pay respect to elders past, present, and future. Just remember, with our housekeeping, cameras on, mics off, break times at 7 and 8 p.m, no smoking or vaping on camera. And some of the content might have trigger warnings that you reach out and seek support. Lifeline's a great one. They'll talk to anybody about anything. 131114. If you're stressed with your work, stressed with your learning, anything, they'll talk to you about anything. That's what they're trained for, trained counsellors. And as we've been learning today, it's great to have some time to yourself and look after yourself. And just remember, we always have respectful relationships here where we listen to each other, give space, and do active listening. All right, let's bring it up to page 51. All right, so tonight we're looking at some of the factors that contribute to homelessness. So we'll be looking at the impact of minority groups. So different groups of people experience things differently and in the community, and some of the impacts on them double up and they become layer upon layer of complexity. Looking at accessibility to basic needs and how these become an issue for many people, and how politics and the economy actually factor into homelessness. So we do know at the current time those factors around the shortage of housing in the states right across Australia, and why domestic and family abuse is the main contributor to homelessness. So let's have a look at these minority groups to start with. So minority groups of culture and housing. So each different area has issues that impact homelessness, and these areas are around racism and discrimination, and these are contributing factors as people face discrimination when trying to access housing, employment, other services, and it makes it very difficult for somebody to escape that homelessness. So not having access to a job doesn't give you access to money to be able to pay the rent, pay the loans. You don't have money to buy services. These days now, it's very hard to find a GP that has bulk billing now. So even having that money, even though you'll get some back, you've still got to have that money to even access a service there. Lack of cultural understanding that can make very different for certain minority groups to access help they need. So language barriers, especially for newly arrived refugees and asylum seekers. it's a crucial field in our community that there are services that help refugees and asylums with language barriers and understanding the different rules, regulations and laws in Australia, around culture here in Australia, how you access support, knowing your rights as a citizen as well. And language barriers are particularly an issue when people are trying to find information out about rentals and they haven't got anybody to interpret for them. Why am I still not getting chosen for these houses? What do I need to change? And often it's very hard to have an understanding of how the housing processes work here in Australia as well. But then that will force people away from seeking support. They become isolated, they live in despair, they'll live in very minimal types of shelter because it's too hard to get over that barrier. So we're going to do some brainstorming and we're going to have a look at the factors that contribute to homelessness of Indigenous minority groups. So I would like, we're just going to groups of, how many we've got in here tonight? We'll go into groups of 2 and we'll look at and I'll put it in the chat for you. Contributing factors of homelessness and of Indigenous minority groups. So this is certainly happening in all our communities across Australia, but for regional and remote areas, it's even worse. So let me just come back and think about also here as a hint, historical disposition and what people often find as a discriminative factor in trying to gain housing. So just let's ask the question, group 1, have you come up with a summary of factors of homelessness of Indigenous minority groups that we can share?
I've come up with a list and a few bits and pieces.
Excellent.
So we got one of the leading factors for Indigenous is domestic violence, which leads to their homelessness, either from leaving or just because people won't rent to them with the history of destruction of property, basically. Unemployment.
Yeah.
Shortage of affordable housing. And also another one that I mentioned was it's a cultural choice of theirs not to live in a house. Like, because I know when we were doing there's only a couple of us here that have been here for that long, but when we did the Aboriginal topic, a lot of the time people try to put them into houses, but they don't want to be in there. They want to be on their lands and live the traditional way. And so they'll either destroy the house or they'll just leave it. And therefore, by our culture's normality, they are homeless, but to them, that's where they want to be, and that is their living choice, I guess.
I just wonder, are we asking the right questions about, instead of trying to put into homes, how do you want to live and how can we help you do that? Yeah, I know that happened in a couple of situations, and for having to conform to what society expects, and not be able to practice culture, not to be able to have own fire pit in yards for a start. And I know that was happening in the houses we had in the homelessness sector for rent. And we were working with the Department of Housing, and people were complaining that people had quite a big fire pits in front yards and they were destroying the grass. But it was this amazing community meeting place that they'd created. But society didn't see it as that. So that's one thing I think that as workers, how are we helping people be connected to where they want to be in their space as well? It's an important question to ask. Great, some great points there, Zoe. Thank you. Room 2.
I think that was me and Kylie and Liv.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So some of the things we discussed was large families, poor tenancy history, lacking tenancy skills, racism from homeowners or real estate agents, distrust from Indigenous people with agencies, and high rent versus low incomes, no support for disabilities in the home, and no homes available in remote areas.
This is great information for you as emerging workers coming out into the field, knowing this information, this background. It's like a layering of issues that are there, that are simmering for a lot of people that will come in and ask for support. And it's great to build our awareness around this. And you guys are actually bringing this awareness to this right now. So you already got these skills here. Just wanted to compliment you on this excellent work. Group 3.
Yep. So Tony said he's actually already done this particular one. So he went through, and when he did it, when he was researching the thing, the main points that came up for it were lack of education in terms of having, an education, being able to afford the homes, racism from homeowners and things like that, poor health, so disability, illness, that sort of stuff coming into it as well. And then the other one was
taken away from the country.
that one. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Forced to live somewhere where they don't want to live.
Yep. And where they don't feel any connection to. And especially for a culture that, connection to land is a massive thing. To be taken away from it is not helpful for their health, mental or physical.
Great work, guys. Good industry level work coming out here. Great skills. All right, let me go back to my screen. If only they had an industry or a course on Zoom. I just need weekly updates, please. So some of the things you mentioned that actually create some of the issues that you brought up for our First Nations peoples is that historical and displacement and dispossession of lands and not having connection to that cultural space, still carrying that intergenerational trauma, as well as loss, grief and loss from being away from lands. And it creates different challenges for them, but it can reverberate right through the generations. And not being able to have traditional resources to nourish themselves with either, and support systems that usually happen with kin in kinship families. The economic disadvantage is around, as you very well pointed out, that education and employment, but also the population growth in certain areas. You talked about overcrowding housing. It's making it harder and harder to have affordable housing. So many families are all bunking in with each other. Where else are they to go? The lack of services to healthcare, education, social services, the lack of culturally sensitive services. So you all mentioned the real estate industry in lacking some sort of empathy, understanding, knowledge around what it is that for First Nations people, what sort of housing are they really looking for? How are they supported to sustain something that they're not connecting with either? But that discrimination that people face when they are out there actively looking for housing and being knocked back all the time. They have limited access due to discriminatory practices and biases that are out there in the industry. Sometimes language can be a barrier as well, and that limits access to service as well. So think of all these things moving forward. So the housing systems and demographics around that are, with the first home buyers, the demographic is that this is most likely across the board. The main group of people will take out a mortgage to buy property, but these days it's based on two incomes. Very rarely is it based on one income now. It has to be quite a high income. And this actually is for economic growth, that these houses still buy and sold. But that then drives the demand for new housing to be built. We're still waiting on the demand for housing to be built for a more affordable accommodation. And all the while the rents are going up. That's changing the demographics of where people can live, what they can afford. Cost of living's going up. That then changes the cost of electricity, water, gas, changes everything. But that demand, our population growth, people moving into certain areas, that thinking that they're going to be able to be near services for support, but actually there are not enough housing. So public housing provided by the government is supposed to be for those who need housing assistance, but for the type of housings usually given to people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, now becomes a commodity for so many more people in the community because of the economic status that's happening right across the country. And you'll often find at the moment too, I think in the last 12 months, they said that people are investing in homes in away from their main home that they live, buying a second home and not renting it out, keeping that as their second holiday home in areas of high population growth. And the ones who are actually putting their second homes up for rent are monopolizing the rental prices in those areas as well. So, and because for some people mortgages have gone up, so they do need to put their rents up. But that stock that we used to have of availability is not there now. Just in the general room here, let's have a look at examples of factors that are taken into account when considering the adequacy of housing for a person. we've talked about some of the factors around the adequacy of housing and how it's affected by domestic violence, no income. What other factors would you be considering on an economic state, considering the adequacy of housing for a person? What do you take into account for that?
I think if they're a single person looking for a house as well, as opposed to a couple,
Yes. Yeah.
single parent.
Yes. And
Like-
so then that means one income. Yeah,
I was
as
going to
well.
say like requirements, if they've got a disability, if they need some adjustments or around the house, if they need ramps or
Different
adjustments to,
access.
yeah, access and the
Related
livability.
related to that is also access to services. So if you've got someone with disability and stuff like that, you can't have them too far from services just because transport is difficult. I mean, even in the ACT, getting transport to and from hospitals if you're in a wheelchair is really difficult to do, or to turn around and go anywhere if you've got a wheelchair is really difficult because there's not much transport. So you've got to be close to services.
And then the houses are not built in those areas near the public services.
Yep.
It's a compounding issue.
Yep.
Liv, in your work,
Mm-hmm.
what would you find one of the main things that you would consider that you would need for adequate housing?
At the moment, we have lack of houses. I was saying, like, even with our the housing, like homes priority wait list, which you have to go in front of a panel. Your case has to go in front of a panel of independent people to assess if you can go on priority. But even priority is 2 months to 5 years. And then we have a service called OneLink, which connects those who are really in need of homes, like refuge, like risk of homelessness or homeless. But even then, like I've been helping a client since October, a young vulnerable client with a disability who's got DV at home, and I can't even get him into any refuge at the moment. It's just, I mean, there's lack of housing, but yeah, there could be a lot of my clients are income as well, which is why they're on the housing, because they can't afford private homes.
Yeah.
And so a lot of our clients are homeless because they just can't afford the private rent. And there's the wait list for housing is huge.
It's huge, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of organisations who are supported through the Department of Housing to have long-term leases for housings to try and have short-term and long-term placements, but those crisis intervention places are full as well.
Yeah, they're really full, and that's what they say. Like, unfortunately, there's no openings. So my client's stuck in hospital at the moment. So
yes, and that's another thing. We do know that the hospitals don't want people to leave unless they've got a safe place to be under a roof.
Well, yeah, they can't send him home because DV and he's got suicidal ideation. So we we don't know. Yeah, we're just kind of stuck. I mean, he doesn't belong in that
hospital. Yeah, but still, it's a roof for now.
Yeah, that's right.
I think one of the biggest problems I found when I was working in the industry was that we had other support services who were providing an emergency night or 2 nights in a motel and would pay a certain amount of money. That's for 1 or 2 nights. Those people, and mostly families with pets, had to go back living in the car.
Yeah.
Because their income, now if they a lot of people are actually given tents, small tents, but where do you go? Because the camping caravan parks had turned into caravans and cabins only, no camping. So they had to move right away from the children's schools. So they still couldn't access. There's a, you know, it's just a compounding issue. And I think working in the field was so, it was hard in having to turn people away and say, we have nothing for you. We will do our best. We've got you on the list. What else can we give you to help you manage the where you have to live right now? But watching how part of society lives and how another part lives, it's a struggle. It's very hard. It's hard on the worker
And with
as
the
well.
housing crisis, what the ACT did was they knocked down a lot of the housing complexes within the city centre and kind of built brand new ones out kind of on the outskirts of Canberra. And what they've found now is because they moved everyone and then like low socioeconomic, you know, low income, there's now a lot of crime in those areas. So the people who are genuinely like families or people with mental illnesses, a lot of our clients don't want to leave home because they're too afraid to leave home because there's so much crime in these areas now and there's lack of transport, lack of services out there. And it's, yeah, it's, I don't know if they've made it better or worse. Like, it wasn't great in the city, but they had the city, the shops and things were close by. Now they're kind of
Access to
isolated.
education,
Yeah,
social places to be.
exactly.
Whereas, and I know in Melbourne on the outskirts, on the northern outskirts, these satellite cities that they were putting up, and they promised to build schools, shopping centers, and have some sort of health access, mini little it's like you go there instead of going to a hospital for minor things. I can't think of what they're called, but it's just like a mini health service, but they
Like a
might be able to
walk-in
do a
clinic or something?
yeah, it's like doing plasters and stitches and
Yeah.
I just can't think of the correct name, but they promised a lot of these in these satellite cities. So some of these satellite cities are 45 minutes to an hour train ride into Melbourne.
Oh, that's far.
Beautiful
Yeah.
country, right? So you could drive to Melbourne within, say, 40, 45 minutes on the highway. It was right next to the highways, these places were, but just in the middle of nowhere. And
Yeah.
the schools that were promised, people are wanting to sell up now because 5 years on, the schools are still not built. So people specifically who came out of the city and wanted to bring their children and have schooling closer to the home still are taking their children many kilometers to go to school. And most people have actually talked about how they've had to end up go to schooling that's near their work.
Yeah.
So the promises of these things haven't happened. They've got, as quite a few families said, we've got the families, we've got the community spirit, we've got nothing here.
Yeah.
You know, so that whole thinking about building, what happens to the money that runs out if they can't finish it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the big picture's not here. It's the same as when they built a block of units just on the other side of Brisbane for affordable housing, 1-bedroom units, lounge room, bathroom, kitchen, bedroom. And they were very small. They're only on a very small footprint. But the housing group also added a full-time job employment officer, a health officer, and a socializing officer as well to try and build a community for those people who are in these 1-bedroom units. So then, because you can become quite isolated. And they actually actively took on board the responsibility of looking after each other in this place as well. So here's great community work happening, but they can't replicate it because they haven't got the funding to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. Tony?
Yeah, Helen, I just wanted the experience you're talking about. Is that the one in Hope Street, West End? Because in West End, there's 2 buildings, a single units for people like that, but then there's another 4 buildings for private owners, and there's, shops and everything.
Hmm.
Is that the one you are talking about?
No,
Hope
this
Street.
one's right near the city centre. It's got access to transport.
Yeah, well, Hope Street is closer to the city than I am, and I'm 15 minutes walk away.
Hmm.
And Hope Street is like 5 minutes most.
Yeah, no, it's a shame that even some of the old buildings in cities, the cost to refurbish them into immediate housing is too much. It's the same as when we've built all these and they built the compounds during COVID. And there's one, there is a compound out in North Melbourne. It's an amazing place, but they're not using it now. But there's accommodation that would be used in an emergency like flood and fire. But other than that, it sits there. What are we doing? To be able to even house some people in a crisis for short term so they're safe and secure, organise a bus route to and from to the main shops, you've got to start to the schools. Yeah. Don't get me started. Right. It's hard as a worker in that we can have our ideas as well, but often being held up against the system of the economic system and the political system as well. The governance over these is quite difficult. So addressing homelessness, that social context, we have at the moment the increasing cost of housing. Now, the increasing cost of housing also goes with the increasing cost of interest rates, the increasing cost of supplies and equipment to do building with. So all of those things are still catching up and the costs are piling up. And it's that lack of affordable housing and the lack of support services in the outer suburban and regional areas that are affecting the social context of where people are living. Older women often are a part of the social context who have not had much income throughout their life, and they haven't been able to source adequate housing for themselves after maybe the relationship's broken down. They haven't got superannuation, and suddenly to be an older person in that situation, if you haven't got family, a lot of people are not prepared to take people on in their homes, but this is where a lot of people were building granny flats and using those shipping containers and converting them, or caravans and mobile homes and making space for people. But then the council said you're only limited with what you can do with this. So it feels like you're fighting up against a brick wall sometimes. That political context of housing, it's a national issue right across the country. And the federal government has introduced certain initiatives to address homelessness, including the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness. But there are many other factors affecting that progress of that, even down to the point of building with not having enough tradespeople to build. We've seen the building industry collapse in all states. Big homes building companies collapsing. Why are they collapsing when we need so much housing? It's the cost involved to be able to buy the equipment to build, the resources to build houses with. Transport costs are even involved in this. So it's causing companies to crash. And the wages, our wages have not kept up with that. So the rise in interest rates, many people are struggling to pay the extra rents or the extra interest rates, but our wages haven't kept up with those increases. So there's another social economic factor that comes into it. So, and it's interesting around the different genders that's experience homelessness, and a lot of the genders experience homelessness due to domestic violence, which we've actually talked about tonight, and poverty. And one special crucial thing that I think everybody has talked about here is the lack of affordable housing. What is affordable housing? That used to be a phrase that we used to be able to meet in the homelessness sector for support for people. We now do not have those stocks for affordable housing. Kylie, can I just ask you before we go to the break, what are the stocks like there for your area in the sector that you're working in? Sorry, Kylie?
Which Kylie are you talking to, Helen?
Oh, sorry, it's two Kylies there. Kylie, North Queensland, please.
Here in Cairns, there is nothing. We've only recently had Cyclone Jasper come through, so we have had a lot of displaced people from there. So what stock Department of Housing had has now been utilised for those that have been displaced. The Cairns rents are just through the roof. Airbnb, because we're considered a tourist town, a lot of landlords took their properties back and are now Airbnb-ing them because they can get higher money there. So as I was saying to the girls before when we were in our groups, when I entered this sector, department wait list was around 2,000. Now it's over 4,000. So it's very dismal here.
So right across the sector.
Yeah.
Lack of affordability, which then creates and compounds more issues for people. And the longer it goes on, the behaviours change, the hopelessness sets in, the difficulties with managing families, relationships, education for children, basic feeding, clothing, all compound and compact on that. I'm just going to stop share. Welcome, Carson. So as we come to the end of talking about economic, think about your role in the sector. If you were working in the sector right now, what would your approach be in working with people who are homeless? What are two things that you would keep in mind in your approach with how you work with people?
One would have to be their education, what they understand and what they know.
Yes.
I think the two things is holistic approach. You approach the person as a whole, not as a one problem. And you understand that no problem can actually be fixed until you fix the house problem. So house first, then you have an holistic approach. Then you handle the other problems. But I've been brought up to work in a philosophy. Whatever I'm coaching, I've got a philosophy. I'll change things, but the philosophy is the same.
Yeah.
So that's my philosophy, holistic approach. and house first.
Thank you. Anybody else have two different things how they would step into the workplace with? What will you be guided by?
I think I would probably,
You go.
no, I was just going to say probably approach it with a person-centered approach, like focusing on the person's needs, and then I guess helping them understand what services are out there to help them, I guess, try and get a home. But that's easy said, because that's what I've been trying to do, and it's not so
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's good to hear from you, Liv, and Kylie from North Queensland, around the work that you're doing in the sector, because it gives a real live view of what's going on here, and some of the difficulties that you face
Yeah.
as a worker. Yeah.
Today was a win for us, where we had one of the judges in the magistrate courts call our organisation and to say, because I was in court on Monday, just to recognise the work that we do with people living with mental illness and disabilities, and how sometimes in court they don't understand what's going on, and they find it difficult, or they end up in jails, or just because of the lack of understanding. So yeah, she called our organisation to ask for someone to attend court with a person with ABI.
Yeah.
So it was kind of really nice for us to be recognized that, people out there do need help, and the court systems, or the systems that are set out there to, whether to help people or, for the judicial systems, sometimes it's just too hard. People don't understand. I had a client today say, just thanking us for caring and our compassion and listening to him, just, ensuring that he's heard, because he said he feels safe and he feels heard, whereas in court he couldn't understand what the judge was saying. And even when she said, "Do you understand me?" he looked at his lawyer, and his lawyer looked at him, and he said yes, and then he ran out of the courthouse, and he ended up in jail because he said, "I was too scared. Like, I don't know what's going on. No one's talking to me. They're making decisions about me. I'm too scared to voice my opinion. I feel like an idiot." Yeah, so I don't know. I know there's like systems in place. The housing ACT in Canberra, unfortunately, has a high staff turnover. And I know there's red tape, but having such a high staff turnover, no one really gets the attention they need, and things get dropped off. And even with services like ours that are constantly calling up and on their case about, don't forget about this person, they still get forgotten about.
So
Yeah, it's very hard.
The load on organisations here as an economic factor as well are crucial
Yeah,
to what's happening in the sector as well with housing. Thank you for your
yeah,
views
I
there.
agree.
Thank
Okay.
you. Anyone else want to share anything? All good? Okay. Oh, Abby, you wanted to.
I was just going to say to consider the client's preferences in finding a home or not finding a home. But I suppose because it is kind of a desperate sector at the moment, they probably won't get to have much, preference really, which is, then snowballs into probably like mental health and things like that.
And it's so hard when you're working in the industry and you finally find something that might fit a family, but when they go to look at it, that's too far from the school. There's no public transport. I need to be able to get to the hospital, weekly for medical checks and things like that. It doesn't have certain accessibility for different family needs. All these factors then suddenly change. We can't accept it. We want a roof over our head, but if I can't do it without, they mightn't have a car, so they're going to rely on public transport. And that then puts them further down the list
Mm.
because of the high needs, which it's so unfair. But that's where we're at, the system, you know, the system's struggling as well. Thanks everybody for your input. Let's have a 10-minute break. Come back at 7:18. So I'm going to continue for now in a lecture style format, just for now until I get to the next break and see if I can get some tech support. So I will find out whether I have to do the recording for tomorrow or not. But for now, let's keep going with our session. So for homeless people, the challenges that can be are around the basic needs, the mental health and addiction issues that many people can suffer from. And this becomes a real challenge as a substance disorder can take over their lives, and the lack of access to appropriate treatment can exacerbate cause these issues to really grow bigger and get out of hand. And then that can hinder people's efforts to secure stable housing. Safety and violence, certainly, as we've heard here tonight, people are more susceptible to violence when they're at risk of homelessness and homeless. And that harassment that people would find when they're living on the streets or in temporary shelters. Other people can be very cruel around others and create stigmas and shame. And stigma and discrimination and stereotyping people is another factor that layers up for many people around. It can affect people's self-esteem, makes it harder to be a part of society. But yeah, who do they reach out to when they feel everything's hopeless? The services could be often overloaded. There's some great work being done out there by homelessness services, but sometimes in different areas, it's just not enough. And education for people. Think about children who are homeless and that education and that inconsistent access to education. And this disrupts their learning process, and it can have long-term educational negative outcomes for many children. So what are some of the other forms of challenges that people who are actually now homeless face? What are some of the things that people face whilst homeless? So think of their living conditions. Think about what they do and don't have access to. What are some of those issues? Can anybody tell me?
They wouldn't have anywhere to put any of their personal property. Like they would just have whatever they can carry, I suppose.
Yes. Yes.
And that's probably not much.
It's a matter and it's so hard with pets. Where do you put, your furniture? Where do you put your belongings that they're safe? Yes, it's really hard. Carlson?
Work, the ability to apply for a job without a proper address.
And it's often that if you don't have an address to give, that you can't even access certain services. Thankfully, Centrelink have changed some of that, in that you had to have an address to access government support. Yeah, it's quite awkward. Liv?
I was just going to say safety, just, being on the streets and feeling, I guess, so vulnerable being in I know conditions like winter, summer, it doesn't matter, and just the people who are surrounding you. I know in Canberra, in the city, there's quite a few homeless that just sleep on cardboard boxes or
Yeah.
around the town, and yeah, there's also the safety concerns for them as well, just being out in the open and so vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that vulnerability that's so hard to see happening, and that hope being lost.
Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, first of all, you had to have a bath before you go to an interview. You can't have a shower. Coming back to live in safety, and through the work I've done, I believe that that's the main reason why we have gangs. People complain about gangs. Well, if you're out in the street, your family's going to be a gang. That's why we have them. They get together for safety, not to cause trouble. I shut up.
No, Tony, please don't say that. You don't need to say that. No. It's important we're all heard, Tony, okay? Don't need to say that. If you want to full stop yourself, just say I'll full stop now.
Okay, thank you, Helen. I will do that. Full stop.
What are some of the other forms of challenges that people may face? Think about being separated from family. Now, like Abby said about carrying your belongings, where do you carry your paperwork that you need to identify yourself? I know for many, trying to open up bank accounts and to be, I know for somebody who had everything stolen, and then for us to try and have things to identify this person for them to be able to get a license again. We were helping them with a blue card with getting work. You know, we could do the blue card again, but their license, their Centrelink, their healthcare card, all take time. And it's a process, even going to the bank. You know, you can ring up and say, you know, bank card's been stolen, or they'll bring identity to come in and collect your new card. How do you do that? So you've got a period of 3 to 4 weeks for somebody who is living on the street to be able to replace the basic cards needed for life, for normal day access to things. You know, we actually struggled with getting somebody in to see a doctor. Luckily, Medicare supported us when we told them around the situation, what had happened. And they actually said, right, well, let's, we can do this by using codes and identification and passwords.